The planet below spun slowly in the viewport of the Harvester of Glories, a leviathan of war and conquest. Earth, blue, green, wet, and dull, to the Tverik. It was just another stubborn world in the long list of defiant colonies, primitive, loud, and overly reliant on illusionary tactics. Commander Kortal stood with his arms crossed behind his back, his scaled chin raised in contempt as he examined the holographic topography of the Eastern European marshlands. Camouflage, he hissed, the word thick with amusement. Smearing mud on your skin to vanish. An ape's trick. The officers around him chuckled. Low, rasping sounds like knives being dragged over stone. Their armor clanked with ceremonial weight, polished and ceremonial, not because they expected resistance, but because tradition demanded a show before slaughter. The Tverik were hunters, warriors, apex predators by birthright, and Earth, like all others, would fall. A blue-tinted visual flickered above the table. Captured footage from a recent engagement. A human squad, covered in leaves and dirt, had attempted to ambush a scout group. Their movements were erratic, desperate. The humans had been torn apart in seconds. Kortal waved his claw dismissively and turned away. Their instincts betray them. They hide like animals and die just as easily. This resistance in the wetlands is the last scrap of hope they cling to. He tapped a claw against the display, highlighting the muddy basin. Send in the first hunt. Let them learn what it means to challenge the bloodline of predators. In the landing bay, 12 elite Tverik stepped onto the drop platform. Sleek, reptilian, taller than any human, they bore no insignia. They did not need any. Their armor shimmered with active camouflage overlays, integrated sensors and thermal counters. One by one, they boarded the sleek descent pod, eyes cold with purpose. As the pod sliced through the atmosphere, the world turned gray and wet. A heavy mist clung to the marshland below. Reeds bent under the weight of humidity in the water, though shallow, offered no reflection, just a dull surface rippling with quiet wind. The pod hissed open. The Tverik moved in formation, their steps silent despite the mud. HUDs blinked as scanners mapped every blade of grass, every twitch in the wind. Drones hovered overhead, scanning with thermal and infrared. Nothing moved. Private Vornek laughed, a sharp bark over the comms. They fled. Kortal's voice crackled through their earpieces. They are too foolish to flee. Spread out. Draw them into the open. The squad obeyed. They fanned out across the marsh, weapons at the ready. The terrain was miserable by any standard, waist-deep in places, teeming with insects, the air thick and heavy. To the Tverik, who evolved on volcanic highlands, it was repulsive, but they were above discomfort. They were hunters. An hour passed. Then two. No contact. No movement. A few old bodies were found. Some bloated, some picked apart by wildlife. No resistance. The hunters grew restless. Vornek stumbled across a crude shelter, barely more than a pit covered in moss and sticks. He crouched to scan it. A nest. Human scent, but old. Mark and move, came the reply. He stood, turning. A crack. A whisper of thunder. Vornek's helmet exploded from the side. His body collapsed into the reeds without a sound. The squad froze. Someone swore in their native tongue. Sniper. Origin unknown, said the team's analyst, scanning the tree line. No heat. No pulse wave. Nothing on sonar. Kortal responded immediately. Pattern response. Blind fire grid. Flush the nest. The marsh exploded in a dozen places as plasma bolts seared the terrain. Trees disintegrated. Mud sprayed in the air. The area around Vornek's last location was leveled into bubbling slurry. Nothing moved. Another soldier stepped forward to examine the fallen. To confirm the kill, retrieve the core. He reached down. Crack. Another shot. The second Tverik dropped backward. The shot punched clean through his eye plate. This time they saw nothing. No flash, no barrel, no shimmer. Panic pulsed below the surface. Discipline held them still. "We are being watched," muttered the squad leader. Kortal's voice was calm. "Hunt him." For the next hour, they swept the swamp. Every shadow was suspect. Every ripple, every broken twig. carried the weight of threat. Drones deployed again, this time in pairs. Still, nothing. No signature. No trace. But something was there. One by one, they started dying. A head jerked back in the mist. The sound delayed. The source impossible to trace. A leg disappeared into the reeds. A gurgle over the comms. Blood diluted in the mud. The sniper was patient, brutal, and terrifyingly precise. No missed shots. No wasted movement. By nightfall, the squad was down to 8. They circled up, defensive posture engaged, head scanning the dark. Then they heard it, a low, slow click. Just one, somewhere behind them, or below. Silence. No one moved. Something about that sound, a mechanical, natural, deliberate, froze them more than any plasma barrage ever had. Far above, aboard the Harvester Glories, Cortal stared at the dwindling squad vitals, not with concern, but with growing interest. He stepped closer to the display and tapped a claw once more on the marshland. So, he said softly, they still have a few teeth left. The lights flickered briefly, and one more signal blinked red on the screen. The man in the mud had begun to hunt back. He lay submerged in the muck, barely more than a lump of wet earth, with a single, unblinking eye peeking through a slit of camouflage netting. Breathing through a reed no wider than a pencil lead, Elias Cole had not moved in 6 hours. The mud was cold, clinging to his skin beneath layers of mesh and thermal-shielded fabric. Mosquitoes buzzed. Leeches tasted his blood. He did not flinch. He didn't need to see the aliens to know they were near. The marsh whispered when something unnatural entered it. The frogs had stopped croaking. The birds had gone silent. The reeds, restless a moment ago, now stood still. Something heavy moved through the water with too much confidence. Elias knew the type. He had watched these Tverek hunt humans like pests in the early months of the invasion. They wore their technology like armor and treated the terrain as if it owed them obedience. They thought numbers and scanners and floating death machines made them invincible. He had waited, watched, learned. The first shot had been a test. The Tverek scout's head had burst open like a fruit dropped from height. The others hadn't even realized it was a rifle. They looked up toward the trees, always upward. It never occurred to them that the threat could rise from the ground. Elias smiled beneath the mud. Years before, back in the last days of Earth's militaries, he had been known as Ghost Mud, not for kills, though he had many, but for how often he was never seen until after the shot. While others relied on advanced optics and remote fire systems, Elias used terrain. He read wind by the way leaves bent. He measured distance with breath. He killed by patience. The second Tverek had wandered too close to a decoy mound. One Elias had carefully shaped and booby-trapped with a corpse's heat signature. When the alien bent down, curious, Elias had fired again. No hesitation. The slug traveled 1,200 meters through thick air and hit clean through the eye plate. 2 kills. 0 traces. Just swamp and silence. Now they were hunting him, and he could feel their confusion thick in the air. They couldn't track him. Their scanners were overwhelmed by false signatures. Heat decoys strapped animals, metal fragments hidden inside frog bellies, misfiring motion sensors triggered by baited wildlife. He'd rigged the entire marsh to misbehave. Elias rotated his eyes slightly, scanning the mist. One of the aliens had separated. The shimmer in the mist gave it away. Active camouflage was sophisticated, sure, but not enough to hide the slight light distortion around movement, especially when seen from beneath the waterline. He didn't move for the shot, just squeezed the trigger as if it were an extension of breath. A third kill. The body dropped, armor half submerged, twitching. No alarms, no scream, just a soft slosh of confusion as the other scrambled, not knowing where it came from again. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. A distant explosion shook the marsh. Likely one of his planted mines. Old Earth tech, scavenged and modified. The aliens had stepped on it. He imagined them cursing in their guttural tongue. But something changed. A mechanical hum vibrated through the roots beneath him. Drones. Not scouts, hunters. These ones could skin deeper, see through foliage, smelled the chemical residues left by breath and sweat. Elias tensed. The real game had begun. He slid back slowly into the water, letting himself sink completely. No sound, no splash. His gear, already saturated with scent suppressants and algae, melded with the mud. The rifle, custom-built, carbon-sleeved, and wrapped in kelp, rested flat along his back. The drones passed overhead. One hovered. It paused. He didn't breathe. The drone's low hum stayed. A second joined it. They scanned in slow, deliberate arcs. Infrared, UV, motion detection. Nothing. Then one blinked red. A faint heat bloom registered. A frog, with a strip of human skin tucked under its belly, taken from a corpse and frozen just enough to thaw slowly, radiating a deceptive pulse. The drone shifted toward it. Calculations flickered in its lens. The frog leapt. The heat spiked. The drone marked it. A microsecond later, Elias moved. He broke the surface, rifle already aimed. 2 controlled shots. One drone shattered in a burst of sparks. The second banked hard, attempting evasive maneuvers. Elias rolled left, fired again. A miss. The drone ascended rapidly. He dropped and submerged. But they'd seen him. He knew it. Mud closed over him once more. But this time he felt the burn of searchlights scouring the swamp. A siren echoed faintly through the mist. The hunt had turned serious. Elias crawled to the roots, deeper into the marsh. His breath came slow and steady, though his ribs ached. His shoulder throbbed where the recoil had hit an old scar. He couldn't stay in this sector. The drones would triangulate, bring an orbital recon. If he stayed, they'd level the whole basin. He reached a cache he'd hidden days ago, buried under rotting wood and moss. Inside, rations, a second rifle barrel, a broken alien comms chip, and a camouflage tarp soaked in slime. He took what he needed. The rest, he rigged to detonate if moved. Elias whispered into dirt, "Let them come." Above, somewhere far off in the sky, the Harvester of Glories tracked the firefight. Cortal watched the new data with narrowed eyes. 3 confirmed kills, 2 drones lost, and 0 visual contact. The Hunter Squad's comms were clipped with nervous tension. Words like ghost, trap, and impossible shot crept in. He leaned forward, intrigued now, not furious. This was no ordinary resistance. 1 man, 1 rifle. Hidden in the mud, Cortal exhaled slowly. Continue the hunt, but tell them to stop laughing. The marsh reeked of decay and panic. By morning, 5 of the 12 elite Teferic were dead, not in glorious combat, not facing a worthy opponent. No, they had simply disappeared. Some were found with perfect holes drilled through their helmets. Others were missing entirely. No corpse, no comms. Just discarded weapons and bent reeds where they had stood. The remaining 7 regrouped on a slightly elevated patch of land, surrounded by black water and silent trees. Commander Cortal's voice crackled in their earpieces from orbit, heavy with disapproval. Adapt or be replaced. No one dared respond. Jervek, the squad sub-commander, had begun recording logs for each fallen hunter. His voice, once arrogant and clipped, had softened into something quieter, less certain. Vornek, slain by kinetic projectile. Probable sniper. Line of fire unknown. Thermal ineffective. Hostile remains unseen. He didn't bother with ceremonial rites. There was no body to burn. They doubled patrols. Drones buzzed overhead in erratic patterns. The marsh resisted them. Misrefracted light. Heat signatures bled into the ambient air. Even sound betrayed them, ricocheting across the water, twisted by trees and wet terrain. The Teferic scanners fed back loops of false positives. Rabbits shaped like humans, cold stones glowing red, whispers where there was nothing. Something was wrong with the air itself. The squad began to mutter about curses. They were not superstitious by nature, but fear unstitched even the most rigid warriors. One of the younger hunters, Krell, broke formation during a sweep. He said he saw something, movement just under the surface of the water. His helmet cam recorded 20 seconds of static, then a glimpse of a mud-streaked figure crawling backwards into a hole no wider than a coffin. Then silence. Krell never checked in again. When they found his body an hour later, it was upright, impaled to the throat with his own blade, arms folded across his chest in a grotesque mockery of Tveric death rituals. His helmet had been turned backward. Inside, someone had scratched one word in the alien's native script onto the visor. Run. Jurvek lost composure. He kicked over a tree root, snarling into the open air, his voice raw. Coward, show yourself. The swamp answered with a bullet. It passed cleanly through the side of his neck and exited just above his shoulder. He dropped, spasming, gurgling red. 6. The squad's medic tried to stop the bleeding, but it was futile. Blood soaked into the mud, indistinguishable from the earth. By nightfall, only 5 remained. They huddled in a tight formation, back to back, heads swiveling. Even their HUDs blinked erratically, as if the swamp itself resisted their technology. Commander Kortal, watching from orbit, said nothing more. He merely observed. Inside the muck, Elias Cole moved like a wraith. His body ached. The wound on his ribs from the earlier drone blast had reopened, leaking blood and water. He had wrapped it with alien bandages he'd scavenged from a corpse, ugly, clingy stuff that smelled like crushed insects. Still it held. He had only a few more rounds. Every shot had to count. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Didn't need to. His mind had long since adapted to micro-rest cycles, second at a time, enough to reset his focus. In the darkness, he thought of nothing but breathing and aiming. His heart beat slower than a resting bird's. He had learned something important tonight. These Tveric weren't invincible. They were skilled, yes, fast, disciplined, but they were also predictable. They assumed dominance. Assumed humans would fight like them, would scream, charge, panic. Elias was none of those things. He was soil with eyes. Another movement, 50 meters to the east. A shimmer. Elias exhaled. The shot hit just below the chin, where armor met throat. The Tveric dropped without a sound. 4. The rest scattered. No discipline now, just reflex and raw instinct. They fired wildly into the trees, into water. A drone dipped low to track heat and was immediately struck by a falling branch rigged with a charge. It detonated midair, showering the squad with burning fragments. Elias was already gone, dragging himself deeper into a trench he carved days ago, now filled with dark water. He slid beneath it like a ghost returning to a grave. Above, the aliens gasped in their language. One tried to run. That was new, not a retreat, a break. He made it 10 steps before a wire trap, snapped his legs in 2. The scream that followed was so raw, even the birds began chirping again, briefly, before falling silent once more. 3. In orbit. Kortal leaned over the tactical map and narrowed his eyes. He saw no enemy pings, no snipers, no tech signatures, only his hunters blinking out, one by one, as if being erased. He muttered aloud, not a soldier, not a man, something else. On the ground, the remaining 3 aliens no longer spoke. They moved together, but clumsily, watching each other's backs more than the horizon. One had begun to tremble slightly. The medic, his breathing was uneven. He muttered to himself. When he turned his back for a second, one of the others raised his rifle and fired. The medic dropped. Cowardice spreads. The killer spat. He would have endangered us. Elias watched from the shadows, eyes narrowed. Let them rot from within. He left them with that. No more shots. Just silence. Let them feel the weight of their own fear. Let them dream of the next crack in the dark. Let them wonder when, not if, he crawled back into the water, whispering one word to the bog as it closed over him. 2. Dawn broke over the marsh, pale and cold, filtered through mist that never lifted. The swamp was still again, but not with peace, with aftermath. Trees stood scorched. Pools of blackened water steamed faintly. Craters had replaced the reeds where drones had detonated, and armor fragments littered the mud like confetti from a funeral. Only 2 Tveric remained. Both had stopped speaking. Even their internal comms were silent. They moved as one, watching every angle, weapons trembling despite the firm grip of trained hands. Their armor, once immaculate, was smeared with blood and algae. Their eyes no longer searched for a fight. They searched for escape. Elias Cole followed from the water, no more than a shadow beneath the surface, breathing through a cracked reed, his movements impossibly slow. His ribs were bruised, his shoulder torn open from the drone's shrapnel 2 nights ago. He hadn't eaten in over a day. His vision pulsed in and out with the rhythm of his heartbeat, but his focus remained sharp. He'd learned something else in the last few hours. These last 2 weren't just frightened. They were broken. One of them had begun humming softly, a ritual death tune, perhaps, or a lullaby from another world. The other twitched with every breeze, turning to fire at rustling leaves or the croak of a frog. Elias let them wander. He didn't rush. Let exhaustion work alongside him. The swamp was his ally now. It covered his scent, swallowed his steps, hid him as it had hidden animals and men long before aliens ever arrived. Above, the Harvester glories drifted silently in low orbit. Commander Cortal watched the feed from the last functioning drone, its lens cracked, half-blind, its view fogged by mist. The screen showed nothing, just swamp, stillness, death. He could no longer deny it. 12 elite hunters sent, 10 confirmed dead, 2 now moving with all the purpose of prey. 1 enemy, 1 human, had done this. Cortal activated the fallback protocol. If extraction wasn't possible within 2 hours, the region would be scorched. A full atmospheric sweep. Burn everything. Elias intercepted the signal. He'd long ago hacked a short-range comms chip from a dead Tverek and jury-rigged it to receive orbital chatter. The message came through in fractured pulses. Orbital cleansing initiate. If signal not returned, 120 minutes. He knew what that meant. They'd wipe the entire swamp clean. Burn everything, even their own men. He couldn't let that happen. He needed to end it now. The final trap had already been set. Elias crawled out of the mud, inch by inch, moving beneath a dense patch of cattails. The rifle was heavy in his hands, slick with marsh water. His hands, numb, fumbled with the bolt. His heart pounded harder than it should have. Not from fear, from urgency. He saw them. The last 2 aliens had stopped. They'd found something. A beacon. Elias had planted it 2 days ago, salvaged from a broken Tverek comms unit, modified to emit the distress frequency their fleet would recognize. One of them approached it. The other stood watch. Elias waited. The moment the beacon's panel was touched, the trap engaged, a faint hum as the signal was rerouted. Instead of calling for help, it sent one message, back up to orbit on a loop. No survivors. Mission complete. Cortal received it with grim finality. He assumed, as a human intended, that the last 2 had died, that the job was done, that no one needed rescue. He gave the abort signal for orbital cleansing. Satisfied, the Tverek ship began ascending. On the ground, Elias took the shot. The lookout dropped instantly, armor cracking against a stone as he fell face first. The last alien screamed, not a word, just a raw, furious sound, and spun, firing wildly into the trees. Plasma bolts carved the marsh apart. Trees burst into flame. Mud boiled. Elias was already moving, circling left, the terrain known to him like an old map. He waited for the reload pause, listened for the click. He emerged only briefly, a flash of mud, steel, and muscle, and fired one last time. The Tverek's helmet exploded backward. Silence fell again. Elias knelt, breathing hard, rifle resting on his knee. His hands were shaking, not from adrenaline, from cold. He was drenched, cut, starving. He wiped his eyes with fingers caked in blood and swamp water. He wasn't sure how long he sat there. 10 minutes, an hour. A distant roar above pulled him back. The Harvester was moving away. The orbit was clear. He'd won. He laughed once, soft and low, a broken sound. A week later, a scavenger team found him. He was buried beneath reeds and mud, barely alive. They almost mistook him for another corpse until he whispered, "You're late." When they pulled him from the swamp, he squinted at the sun as if seeing it for the first time. He was thinner, dirtier, but alive, one of the medics asked, half joking. You the one who did all this?" Elias didn't answer at first. Then, as they lifted him onto the evac transport, he muttered, "They stopped laughing." The camera footage from the battlefield was later reviewed by military intelligence. Most of it was static, destroyed drones and glitchy helmet feeds. But one clip survived, transmitted just before the Tverek beacon went dead. A muddy human, crawling out from the swamp like something bored of the earth, face half covered in vines, one eye visible and locked on the lens. Silent, patient, unblinking. The message was clear. Earth didn't need high command or fleets to survive. Sometimes, it only needed one man in the mud.